Hi everyone, back to InDesign 1. We are now on webcast 5. This is the continuing set of webcasts that are focusing on multiple objects and transformations. This particular webcast is going to take off where the last one left off, and we are moving from aligning objects to copying objects, and that can also include duplicating objects. There's going to be some continued features which will be included when we get into transformations, but we're just going to focus on the basics of copying and duplicating objects. So I'm going to go over here to my demo file and zoom in. All right, we know that with just about any program that we work on, we have the ability to go to the edit menu and copy something, and then go back to that edit menu and paste it, or use the keyboard equivalent, Control or Command C as in copy, or Control or Command V as in Victor, which is the paste command. And those commands work just fine inside of InDesign. But when you do a generic copy and paste like that, InDesign determines where that copy is going to be pasted. And typically, InDesign always pastes that in the center of your screen. Not the center of your page, but it takes what's the application window and then pastes it in the center. So let's just try that. I'm going to select this blue rectangle, and I'm going to copy it using either my keyboard equivalent or using the menu, Edit, Copy. And then I'm going to deselect off of that object and then go back to the edit menu and just choose paste. And sure enough, if I look at my screen, measure from over the left edge to here, over to the right edge to here, and then top to bottom, you can see that it's pretty well centered on my screen. And that may not be where I want that object to end up. And it takes extra steps to move it. And in InDesign, we are given so many options to become efficient. And one of the frustrating things I think for a new student is it seems like there's 10 ways to do everything, which is usually true. But by understanding the different ways to accomplish the same task, you are going to be able to adapt how you do something to the situation. That's going to make you faster, it's going to make you more efficient, and it's going to make you a much more valuable user if you're doing work for other people. And it also impresses your friends. I love David Blattner has a saying that to know these things is not just for impressing your friends, but it does actually make you more efficient. So I'm going to delete this item. Now, before I leave that whole copy and paste, I want to show you where that command is important. Let's say that I am working on a set of master pages, or I'm working on a bunch of left-hand pages. I can click, another client is uploading things to Dropbox. Sorry about that. So you're getting all of the information about what's being uploaded, which I can't turn off at the moment. Anyway, let's say that I want this particular rectangle to appear in the exact same place in a different page. Well, in that case, this is going to be a nice way to handle that, because if I try some of the other methods, I may not get the result that I want, or I'm going to have to keep dragging and scrolling. So again, I'm going to copy this, but this time instead of using the edit menu, I'm just going to right click and choose copy. And then I'm going to move down to the next left-hand page. I'm going to zoom out so everybody can see the whole page. But this time, instead of using paste, I'm going to use this command, paste in place. And look at that. That blue rectangle is now in the exact same position on a left-hand page as it was on the previous page. This is going to help you so often when you are trying to repurpose items from one document to another. Logo positioning. Sometimes with a particular type of document, if we are not working from a template, we need that logo to go in the exact same place in another file. And this is just a great way to do it. Now, of course, we could have always just looked at its XY orientation, made sure that our reference point was in the same place, and I could have said, all right, this has a 4P 7.375X and a 4P9 vertical offset. And I often am sitting there with a little piece of paper scratching these things down, or I do a copy and paste on one of them and then paste it into the other, probably the one that's the most difficult to remember, which is this X one. But by being able to paste in place, that's really nice. But here's where this little scenario falls apart a bit. If your 0 point does not repeat once it hits a new page, and by default, InDesign's ruler goes from 0 all the way up to the right edge of its facing page. So I'm looking at a spread here, and this is where this isn't going to work. If I copy this, and then I move to this page, and I can even try to force myself to go to that page by double-clicking on the page in my Pages panel. If I now do paste in place, it pastes it right on top of the previous one because it sees the entire spread as a single 0 to whatever it is. In this case, it's what, 96, 97, 8, 9, 10, 11, well, I don't see, 96, 97, 98, 99, somewhere around 100. So that won't work as well, and you can modify your rulers a little bit. You can modify your preferences to get that to work better. But if you're working in a facing page layout, just make sure that you're aware of that. Okay, I'm going to get back to this rectangle. You can see that it did paste it right on top because I've got one exactly on top of the other. You can use the Edit Copy command to copy frames, tabs, and even ruler guides. And I want to show you this because sometimes duplicating a ruler guide is kind of nice. I'm going to drag a ruler guide down right in between the blue rectangle and the red circle. And then I've deselected. You can see that its color changes, and I want to be sure that it is selected. So I purposely deselected so you guys could see the color difference. And now I'm going to copy, and this time I'm just using my keyboard equivalent, Control-C or Command-C. And I'm going to move down to that left-hand page because as we know, it's going to work better if I stay on the same side of a spread. And I'm going to right-click and choose Paste in Place. Notice that that guide went in the exact same place. Let me zoom out on the second page as it was on the first page. So you can extend this functionality to lots of different items. I'm going to delete that for the moment. And let's move on to another way to copy objects. Of course, the way that I duplicate images or copy images or frames or rules or anything else, I would say 95% of the time, is I do a drag of that object. And that's because often I want that object, the duplicate of that object, right near the first one. So I select the object, I hold down the Alt key on the PC or the Option key on the Mac, and I drag. And whatever you drag is duplicated. We talked about this in the webcast where we were talking about placing footers on a page, on two master pages, a left and a right, and this is a great use of that. But what if I want to duplicate this rectangle and I want it to be absolutely parallel to the previous one, have the exact same vertical offset? Well, in that case, I hold down my Alt key, which gives me the second little arrow, like a little shadow arrow, but then immediately I need to hold down my Shift key. And whatever direction I start dragging, it will try to hold to that direction and not let me waver up and down. So there's 1, 2, and then of course my smart guides are telling me when that distance between the first and second is the same between the second and the third. And I can go through and create several of these, and I know for a fact now that because I held down my Shift key, all 5 of these are aligned exactly at their tops, and I know that their gaps are exactly the same. But this took me a little bit of time, so I may not want to do that for multiple objects. We're going to get into another method a little bit later in this webcast called step and repeat, where we can automate this to a certain degree. Now I'm going to jump ahead just for a sec because it's a similar type of solution to automate the duplication of an object, but instead of using step and repeat, we're going to use the same Alt function. Now the reason I don't use this is because it's a bit of a finger mangler. I click on the object, I have to hold down my Alt key, and I need my Shift key also to keep in mind, but as I start to drag, I can use my right arrow key. I press it 3 times, and what I'm getting here are 3 additional, I must have pressed it, 1, 2, 3. I must have pressed it 1 more time, and I can see that I get 4 objects, 4 additional objects. Let me do that again. So I have my object selected. I hold down my Alt key or the Option key on the Mac, and if I want them to duplicate in parallel, I'm going to have to hold that Shift key down as well. But for this time, I'm just going to leave the Shift key off, and I'll show you what happens. As I start to drag, I click on that right arrow key, and every time I click on the right arrow key, it is adding another object. Now without the Shift key, I'm able to create this kind of slant of objects, and there's some nice effects I can do with this, which we're going to find out we can do with the step and repeat as well. But in order for me to do this, I've had to move my hand over to the right side of my keyboard, and I'm really stretching. Now I'm on a PC right now, and depending on whether you are on a laptop keyboard or a full-size keyboard, or if you're on the Mac, in some cases, for example, my Mac laptop only has 1 Option key, and that's over here on the left-hand side, but my arrow keys are over on the right-hand side. There's no way I'm going to be able to stretch my hand from the Option key on the left to an arrow key on the right. Keep my right hand on the mouse. You know, I'm just fighting myself. So this is why, though this is a really awesome effect that I have access to, I just don't use it. Okay. Let's talk about another way to duplicate an object. When you do a copy and paste, that copy goes into what we call the clipboard. This is a universal term, whether you are on a Mac or a PC, or whether you're on Windows XP, 7, 8. The clipboard can contain usually 1 item in memory. And if you copy something else after you copy a first object, that first object leaves the clipboard. So we always want to be aware of what's in our clipboard if we're using some sort of copy and paste. But the duplicate command in InDesign does not interfere with the clipboard. So let me show you how we can use that to our advantage. I'm going to first just use this circle, and I'm going to duplicate it by doing my Alt drag, because I want to show you how the duplicate command remembers the last offset of the last item you copied or duplicated. And to make sure that this is right in line, I'm going to move this straight down as a reference point. I'm going to go back to this original circle. Let me zoom in just a little bit here. Let this refresh. Okay. And then I'm going to go to the Edit menu and choose the command Duplicate. Instead of pasting it like the paste command does, it remembers the last offset. And as you can see, it has mimicked the last offset I used exactly. Now let's try this again just to see if I'm trying to pull a fast one on you. This time I'm going to drag it this far. And then I'm going to move it down so that we have this space open. Again, click on the object, Edit, Duplicate, which does have a keyboard equivalent, by the way. You have to hold down several keys, so it might be easier to use the Edit Duplicate or to right-click. And I'm not even sure that the duplicate command is on the right-click, and it's not. Every once in a while, we get a command that we really use a lot, and it just does not happen to be on there. And I was just thinking maybe it might be on A7. secondary menu, but it's not. You can see I don't use this command that often. All right, so we're stuck with the menu or the keyboard equivalent. And sure enough, it mimicked exactly the last position. Now here's where this is really going to be handy. I'm going to copy this star. So I'm going to right-click and copy. And then I'm going to go back to my circle, again, duplicate it. And you can see that it didn't pull the item from the clipboard. And now if I do a paste, you can see I get my star. And it's just a coincidence that it's right near that circle. It just happens to be the center of my screen right at the moment. So that's one nice thing, is if you need to duplicate something but keep something in the clipboard, you have that option using the duplicate key. So all of this is all well and good, but what if I want to create multiple objects? And I showed you how we can do that using the Alt-Drag, but there's a more automated way to do this using the Step and Repeat command, which is on the Edit menu. And we're going to move down to this star and do a little bit of this. With my star selected, I'm going to go to the Edit menu and choose Step and Repeat. And I get a dialog, and of course it's already ran with the last options that were already in here. So I'm going to change these to 0 just for a moment. Oh, I need a 1 at least. Sorry about that. And I'm going to say just 1 and 1. And when I press the Tab key, you can see that right now there's no vertical offset, but the horizontal is way too big. It's off my page at this point. So I'm going to say, let's say a ½ inch. And as I create another column, you can see that it's duplicating it. And they're overlapping because there's just not enough space here between. 3 picas is not enough to separate these stars. So I'm going to increase the space so that I get some white space between each of these. And because it has Create as Grid selected, which on my system is the default, it means that if I increase the rows, so let me do the rows, increase those by 4, but there is no vertical offset. So they're sitting, there are 4 of these, but they're right on top of these 4. So let me start increasing that vertical offset, and immediately we can see that we've got a grid forming, which is why it says Create as Grid. And if I increase to 5 and 5 and 6, 7, this is a great way to duplicate a large area of items very quickly and very easily and very accurately. That's the important part. If you're just designing, you have lots of leeway to determine how you're going to design something. But once that design gets put into production, possibly by hundreds of times, let's say that you're working on a company technical note or app note, there has to be consistency from one to the next because you need to enforce that company brand, and that brand is part of your design. So a lot of the work I do is to make sure that I am very accurately repeating a process. And there may be a brand that says this duplication of objects has to be exactly 1 pica of white space in between, and there needs to be 5 by 5, and so on and so forth. And I'm probably exaggerating because I don't have any clients who are using stars. It's usually some sort of a rule, or it's a logo, or some piece of the logo. But anyway, I think you guys can get my drift here. Now if I'm going to delete these cute little stars, though I like them. Actually I'm going to do an undo because I want to keep that 1 star there. If instead I don't want a grid, I just want to use Step and Repeat to create a single row or a single column, I can turn off the grid, Create as Grid. Notice immediately that column disappears and row gets turned into count. Now let me just show you that again. On, we have rows and columns. turn it off, and we just get a count. Right now I have a 5 pica vertical and horizontal, but let's bring that count down. I'm going to, by the way, when you're clicking on these little arrows, I think I've mentioned this before, but you may not remember. If you want to move through a measurement faster, you can hold the Shift key down and it jumps much faster. If I have the vertical offset set to 0, I get a row. If I make the horizontal offset 0, in this case I'm going to click on 0 to highlight the field, type a 0. Oops, not a -0, but a 0. And I'm going to change my vertical offset. So horizontal offset to 0 is going to set that alignment to a vertical alignment, and there's going to be no horizontal offset whatsoever. And if you're going to create a combination, you're going to get this little slant. And I know some of you who are really into creating special effects, that there's just so much you can do with this. I absolutely love it. All right. If I had a graphic, and let me just go ahead and click OK, and I'm going to delete this. Say that I have a couple of vector images over here on the side. I'm going to bring my little daisy here. And let me go to Step and Repeat. Trying to get this dialog out of the way so you guys can see the impact of this. And you can see that my daisies took immediately the last offset that I had. I'm going to bring this down to 4, and maybe I need the vertical to be, or the horizontal, I think, a little bit more. So I have just a little bit of space between my daisies. And if I go into Preview, you can see how nicely you can populate a page with a certain type of pattern. And if I had used the grid, I could have had daisies covering this entire page. All right. That's it for objects. I hope you guys will jump into that right away and practice it. In fact, I hope sometimes when you're listening to webcasts, you have InDesign open if possible on your machine. I know I do this a lot when I'm listening to webcasts on different applications. I pause it and then I try it immediately. And I find sometimes it really helps me remember things because immediately my hands are interacting with that thought. And sometimes when you're mixing that muscle memory with your brain memory, it tends to last a little bit longer. Right, when we are copying and pasting, I want to just move from objects to text for a moment because one of my favorite commands has to do with copying and pasting text. I have 2 lines of type here, this text in this line and then the text in a new format. And this is going to work as well when we get into paragraph and character styles, but let's just zoom in here on these 2. If I copy text, so let's say that I wanted this particular text box to say the text in a new format. So I go over here and I say, all right, I'm going to select a new format, and I'm going to copy it. And in this case, I'm just going to use my keyboard equivalent, Control or Command C, and then I'm going to replace this line. Whatever you have selected when you paste text gets replaced, just as you would expect in Microsoft Word or any of these others. But when I do the paste, I've got a problem. Half the line is the old format and half the line is the new format. And that's not what I want here. What I really want is for the new text to take on the format of the previous line. So instead of carrying over the red and the, what is this, Avenir 20 on 21, I wanted to replace this text, but I wanted to stay in Adobe Caslon Pro semi-bold at 23 point on 25 point. And I can do that. I'm going to select the text again, highlight what I want replaced, but this time instead of using just paste, I'm going to use the paste without formatting. and voila, I get exactly the effect that I wanted. Maybe I want to stretch this out so the format fits, but regardless, you can see that it takes on the attributes of the destination location. I use this all the time in my work. It's one of the most common paste commands that I use on a daily basis because I'm often pulling text from one document, putting it into another document, but I need it to take on the attributes of the new document, the document that already has its format defined and it's different from the place that I copied that format from. When you paste text from anything outside of InDesign, it automatically does this. InDesign does not carry the attributes of other applications in a copy and paste function. But if you're going from one InDesign document to another, or from one page in an InDesign document to another page, this is where this command is going to come in really handy. All right, there was one other thing I wanted to mention. I'm just going to see if I can quickly go back to this. This was from the previous webcast. We were going over align and distribute. One of the things I realized I didn't really touch on very much, I kind of jumped over it, was the distribute objects and this little U spacing. Because I typically use, when I want to put a specific amount of space in between, I use this bottom one. But I want to explain what this does. And let's say that I move some of these out of sync here, just like we would expect. All right, so the distribution of these is off, right? We have an irregular distribution here. So I'm going to select this. And I did say that when we use the distribution commands, by default, it's going to use the space from the left edge to the right edge, and then distribute what space it has in between. So if I click distribute centers, what I get is what I would expect. But what if I say that instead of using the total selection as the area that it has to work within, what if I want a specific amount of space between the centers? So let me just look at the width of this daisy. It's about, what is it, 4 picas, 10 points, a little over that. So let's say I wanted, let's say double that between each center. I could go down and say, instead of what the spacing would be automatically by measuring the entire width of the selection, I'm going to say I want 8 picas from center to center. And now when I click on center, notice that it increases that space so that between the center of this daisy to the next is 8 picas, and all the way through. Or I could say, what if I wanted 4 picas in between and centers? Now they're going to overlap. So it's just changing the default of the selection and using that spacing, but it's still measuring from either the center, the right edge, the left edge, the top edge, vertical center, and bottom edge, which is very different from saying no matter what the position is on these, I want to be sure that I'm getting exactly this much space in between each of these objects. So I click, and now I know that that gap is exactly 6 points because that's what I designated down here at the bottom. All right, moving forward, we are going to start getting into transformation. So we're going to talk about scaling and skewing and rotating, all the things that we want to do to make our pages a little bit more interesting. So until the next webcast, signing off.